I would challenge one that I knew would make some Republicans sweat when it came up to a vote. Because they're going to have to decide, are they pro-tariffs on Canada or not? And they're all going to have to vote. I've got a number of Republicans who have been saying, well, I wish the president wouldn't do that. Or, well, I hope it's only tariffs for a short time. And they're expressing concern. But it's one thing to express concern, and it's another thing, okay, you have a chance to stop it. If you vote against these tariffs, we can stop them. And every senator is going to have to make that call next week. Now, to be clear, what I can do is if I get my bill passed in the Senate, House has to pass it too. They would have to face a tough vote. Goes to the president, he could veto it. But I've done this before, and when I get a bill like this to the president's desk, even though he decides to veto, this happened once during his first term, he realizes I'm on thin ice when I've got both houses saying I shouldn't do this. I'm on thin ice. And so my goal is to force this vote, and it will happen, as I say, the 26th to 27th. So I'm doing what I can. When I have an ability to force action on these issues that matter, I'm doing it. And let me just say one other thing about this so-called Canadian emergency. What is the Canadian emergency that the president declared? The president declared there was a Canadian emergency because of fentanyl coming over the border. For the same reason to do the Mexico tariffs. Now, is there a fentanyl crisis? Yeah. It's a crisis, though, at the southern border, not at the Canadian border. I'll give you the numbers. Last year, we interdicted 21,000 pounds of fentanyl coming across the border from Mexico to the United States. And I think you could say that is an emergency. Now, whether that emergency means tariffs, I mean, you might say, well, that's an emergency. It should mean more interdiction technology and tougher penalties for cartels. And so I don't necessarily connect the emergency with tariffs, but I don't think you can say 21,000 pounds of fentanyl coming over the border. Nobody is going to downplay that and say that's not anything to worry about. Okay, that's an emergency. But how about from Canada? Last year, we interdicted 43 pounds of fentanyl coming across the border from Canada. 21,043. And Canada interdicted more fentanyl coming north from the United States than we interdicted coming back here. This is not a Canadian fentanyl emergency, not by a long shot. So that raises a question. If there really isn't a Canadian emergency, and Canada has been an ally of ours forever, that doesn't mean we agree on everything. There's trade issues we have to work out with them. And we have a trade deal that President Trump put together, USMCA, that gives us a channel for resolving disputes. So if there's no Canadian emergency, then why put tariffs on products from Canada? Well, I think I know the answer, which is this. The administration is working on a tax bill that they're going to put on the table in Congress sometime probably within the next 60 to 90 days. They did a tax bill in term one. When they did it, the Trump tax bill in term one, it was a tax giveaway largely to the wealthiest people and biggest corporations. But they didn't pay for the tax cut, and they just ran up the deficit to do it. The Republican majority in the two houses doesn't want to run up they want to do another tax bill, but they don't want to run up the deficit. That means they got to pay for the tax cut. And the way they're planning to pay for it is they're going to take all this, quote, savings from freezing agricultural loan funds and laying off people at the VA. They're going to take all that savings, and then they're going to take all the revenue that's raised from tariffs. Revenue raised just off everyday people paying higher prices for, household supplies and groceries. They're going to put that together, and they're going to use that as the pay for the tax cut.
Boo!
And so, that's why the president has to say there's an emergency in Canada. There's no emergency, but the goal is use the tariff revenue to help pay for the tax cut. And I'm very much against that. Just as I was against even the short-term budget deal that we voted on last week.
Yes.
I don't think this House deal, which was essentially just giving the keys to President Trump and saying, you decide how to spend the money, I can't sign on to that. you know, the Congress is the Article I branch. We're supposed to be the ones with the setting the budget. The president's supposed to be implementing it. We shouldn't get in the president's way on that, but we shouldn't be letting the president write the budget. That's our job. And so a short-term deal that basically, in my view, gave the keys. Today, I'll get rid of half the Department of Education. Tomorrow, I'll get rid of, you know, Voice of America to stop it. So it is a time to fight. Now, one of the challenges that we need to focus on is, A, we're a minority, so there's some things we would like to fight that are tough, and B, this president and his team are pretty slick in that they're doing about 50 things every day. And if you fight 50 things every day, you're not really
not doing anything.
The fight on the things that matter. So
Facts.
we always have to decide, okay, what is the high priority, and really go after it. But my sense is, John, on things where we have just the opportunity, even as one senator challenged tariffs as an example, let's do that one and make everybody vote. So that's kind of by way of, you know, introduction. But I'm really here to listen and answer your questions and take your advice. So with that, thank you for coming. I'd love to open it up. And just, if you ask a question or offer me advice, just introduce yourself. But let's go.
Hi, I'm Princess Williams.
Princess, great to see you.
And I just had a quick question about the Farm Market Fresh program. It's
Okay, good. Tell me about it.
It's something that the state of Virginia implemented through WIC.
Okay.
And what they were doing were they're initially allowing minority farmers to come in and supply those vegetables, and they would provide the recipients with like a card. And I know in some counties last year they did it. Out where I'm from in Charlottesville, it was actually just the first year I've been doing that. And I just want to know, with all the freezes, because I've been hearing now that that program has gone away. Do you have any insight on that, or would that be something that you can bring up for us?
Yeah, no, and Princess, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Taylor get your contact information, because I'm going to go back to the office, and Evan is the guy in DC who does all my work on ag stuff. So I'm aware of this program, and it's called Farm Market
Fresh.
Farm Market Fresh. Farm Market Fresh. Okay, we're going to find out the status of it. Here's what I know happened. That was a pilot program under the previous Farm Bill.
Right.
We were supposed to get the Farm Bill done and reauthorized at the end of the last calendar year. And that program, we think it was a big success, and we really liked it. The Republicans, after the election, they decided, well, listen, we don't, and by saying this, Republicans, Democrats, I'm not here to give a campaign speech. This isn't partisan. I'm just telling you what happened. After the election, the Republicans said, wait a minute, in January, we're going to have 2 Republican houses. So instead of negotiating the Farm Bill before December 31, where it's a Republican House and Democratic Senate, let's just wait till next year when we have 2 Republican houses. So they stopped the negotiation on the Farm Bill reauthorization, where we had that program as a priority to not only maintain the pilot, but even expand it. Now they said, we're going to do the Farm Bill with the 2 Republican houses. And we will definitely fight to make sure that that program is a high priority for continuing it. I don't know, in answering you right here today, what the Republicans think about that program. And, you know, I know what my own colleagues think. You know, we like farm markets, and we like you know, black farmers and minority farmers having the path in. We like people being able to use WIC benefits to come in and buy fresh food. So often people live in neighborhoods where they have the benefit, but the stores are not, you know, offering healthy offerings for them. So it's like a perfect thing for the consumer, and it's a great thing for farmers too. So I'm very supportive of it, but we'll get your information so we can both advocate for it, but then let you know what the prospects are like.
Awesome.
Thank you.
One of the issues, thank you, let's give him a round of applause first of all. One of the issues I've been hit with in the media is the president wants to bring white South African farmers in and give them an expedited path to citizenship and grazing land from the Department of Interior and land and inventory.
Thank you.
Primary things for some of these families in here. Of course, I'm highly opposed to that. Any thoughts you can give, or maybe a strategy on how to address it too, would be helpful.
Yeah, so on that, I mean, that was kind of one of those things, you never would have thought, you look at the paper and you read, at the same time as the president seemingly wants to deport a whole lot of folks, he wants to create a path for Afrikaner farmers to come to the United States, and that was one of these things. Where did that come from? Well, I'll tell you who it came from. It came from Elon Musk, who grew up in South Africa. Canadian born, but the family moved to South Africa. And that idea, which is, you know, kind of a harebrained scheme, and that's being charitable, that clearly was an Elon Musk idea. That is getting pretty much zero traction in Congress, but the president has some power to use something called humanitarian parole. That was how President Biden was able to help Afghan families settle here, and some families from Ukraine come here. And so if the president wants to do that using humanitarian parole, the president can. Now, I think the allocation of federal lands to those families, though, would be Congress. The president couldn't do that on his own. And so that one would be one where if you're gonna allocate, you know, federal lands to farmers, maybe that's not a bad idea, but it's not that Afrikaners should be first in line over Americans.
We like to have our land out every time.
Yeah, so, yeah, what about America first? I mean,
That's right, what happened to that one?
Yeah, so I think the, Congress would have to approve any allocation lines.
Well, Senator, look, let me tell, if you could just tell the senator where you're from and your name, so you know who he's talking to.
We started with Princess from Charlottesville, so.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, Princess Williams. I'm from New York, but I live in Charlottesville now.
Great.
Lester Bonner, Dinwiddie County, Virginia.
Vernon Yates, Dinwiddie County.
Calvin Bonner, Dinwiddie County.
Rashard Jones, Dinwiddie County. Rudy Jones, Dinwiddie County. California.
Andre Barlow from Northern Virginia.
Andre.
Marty Bouchard, Myrtle Beach, South Texas.
Casey O'Roger, Loudoun County.
Thanks.
Zachary Morris, Nelson County.
Nelson,
Gerald Morris, Nelson County.
good deal.
What's your Franklin County? Laura Glasgow, Richmond, Virginia. I have a question for you, but I'm gonna let all the farmers get it off the
Okay.
table first.
Great.
But if you could come back to me,
Sure.
I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so Laura or Lauren?
Lauren.
Lauren, okay.
Malcolm Thomas, Richmond, Virginia.
Hey, Mr. Thomas. Ma'am?
Miss Betty.
Betty Boyd from Bracy, Virginia.
Right.
John Boyd's mother.
All right. Mama. Mama is in the house. Mama's in the house.
Carol Boyd, enrolled member of Lummi Tribe of North Carolina, Lummi Fairness Act.
Yes, indeed. And good to see you again. Carol.
Yes.
And then how about all the way in the back?
Abigail Flores, Robinson County, North Carolina.
Abigail, good to meet you. Can I introduce my team?
Yes. Next question.
Please.
Appreciate you coming in today and everything. We all probably gonna get something from the administration, but we need to know how we're gonna get the information, because a lot of times they'll have something passed, they won't even tell us it's out there,
Yeah.
until it's all gone, or
Right.
the date's expired.
Right.
So how do y'all plan on getting that information to us, let us know these programs up there to help?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that you asked that, because that segues into something that I didn't talk about, which is on the opportunity side. I laid out some challenges, but I'm gonna talk about opportunities. First, I take your question, it is a challenge for us that we have to, and I'm glad I have Mia here, my press secretary, because she and Janina, my office, are responsible for communication, and we know how to get to John, and we can communicate to John and communicate to others when there are opportunities. We always can do a better job at that, always can do a better job at it. And it's right, when we, did the PPP loans at the start of COVID, an awful lot of them, we put a lot of money in that bucket, but by the time everyday folks figured it out, a lot of people with lawyers and accountants had already gotten all the money. So we do have to figure out things to do where we can make sure that we get the information out and that everyday folks are not cut out of it. So that is an important thing. And there are opportunities, there will be opportunities. Here's something I learned from President Trump in the first term that actually was kind of a good thing. President Trump it'll sound like a criticism, but it turns out it's a good thing. He has what I would call the biggest zone of disinterest of anybody who's ever been president. Meaning, the things he's interested in, he's really interested in. But most stuff he doesn't care that much about. I got a lot of bills passed when Donald Trump was president. Talk about Lumbee recognition. I got all the Virginia tribes recognized when Donald Trump was president. We worked on those bills. It got to his desk. He didn't invite me to the signing, but he signed it. We got a lot of legislation passed, and so it's because I'm a Democrat. He's not, going to be against everything I propose. If he cares about it, he cares about it a lot. He'd fight me tooth and nail if I was against him on Canadian tariffs. But on other things, could be an education priority, could be a healthcare priority, could be an ag priority because he says he likes farmers, could be a veterans priority, he says he likes veterans. We can do some things and get bills to his desk, particularly because there's another factor that's at work, which is to the extent that my Republican colleagues, they're not wild about some of the stuff that Trump is doing, but they're afraid to cross him. It kind of makes them want to find, well, but I got to show I'm a reasonable person on something else, and so they start looking for bipartisan wins with Democratic colleagues to do other things. So I think I'm not dealing with this set of challenges right now in the theory that it's all playing defense. I actually think there are opportunities. And so priorities that you have, John, we should figure out how to advance it. Now we also have to grapple with another reality. DEI, anything in the civil rights space, Donald Trump hates. He absolutely hates it. And we're not going to persuade him otherwise.
Yeah, I understand.
So, the school systems are dealing with that. I was with the superintendent of the Fairfax County Schools yesterday. They have, 140,000 students. And she said Friday night she got a call from the Department of Education saying somebody complained about a bulletin board in one of her middle schools that they thought was too DEI. And she's like, the Federal Department of Education is worried about a bulletin board at one of my schools. Talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. It's a waste of my time to have to answer those questions. So anything in the civil rights space, or there needs to be a focus on black farmers, or there need to be a focus on, Hispanic student performance, they will be hostile to that. But that doesn't mean we can't still think of, okay, if you have,
ways to get around it.
yeah, are there programs we can do, and we can describe it in such a way that it doesn't run across their tripwire. And I believe we can do that. So yes, we are looking for positive opportunities. And I bet we'll find some. I bet we'll find some things where we'll get bills to the president's desk and he'll sign them. And because we know he cares about ag and forestry, to the extent that he thinks tariffs are hurting, he'll probably want to do some things that will be helpful. And we will work on those together, but I take your challenge. We've got to get the word out to people. Please.
Senator
Yeah,
Timken?
Carol.
There were several states that were able to distribute the money under the MASC, the marketing assistance for specialty crops.
Yeah.
But there were others that delayed the
Mhm.
process. So myself, my application is waiting because the county committee never reviewed it. And that's been an ongoing issue with FSA, with things and decisions being made at the county committee level.
Yep.
And so, it seems a little unfair that there were other states and some places across, Virginia and Colorado, where these farmers are waiting those payments. Now's the time when we need that support so
Okay.
that we can be planting.
Yep.
So, we have farmers that haven't received a decision saying they were approved. We have farmers that have been approved but never received the
The
money.
funds, yeah.
And then we had other farmers that were approved with less stringent criteria. So
Okay.
we saw variance across the program. The other thing is the ECAP, the $10 billion for the commodity farmers.
Yep.
Now, the deadline by Congress to have that money out is the 20th, it's Friday. They haven't even initiated an application process. Now, what will that look like? Because what they're telling us, what Secretary Rawlings is saying, is that there's gonna be a expedited process. So those farmers who have reported their crops to FSA, they're gonna receive a pre-filled application. The question that I have is where do these farmers, especially Black and Native American and other minority farmers, have confidence in any contracts or agreements that they sign with FSA or the government to
Right.
receive these monies? that it's gonna be delivered when we've had our other bills repealed.
Yeah.
Because it's a contract, and what we're seeing is with the NBFA, that was awarded grant monies that have done the work, turned in the bill first,
Yeah.
not getting paid.
Mhm.
And others that have contracts being terminated.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of mistrust. Our farmers are saying, I'm scared to plant.
Yeah.
Dr. Boyd has encouraged them plant.
Yeah.
But what would you say to that?
I would also agree on the plant side, but I do want, Taylor to get your contact information so I can have Evan reach out to you about the 10 billion. That was the first thing actually John said to me when I walked up, is what's gonna happen with this 10 billion that's frozen. Because yeah, you would worry that if it's frozen, but we're gonna have an expedited process, well, the expedited process could violate the principle we were just talking about. Only certain people get told, and there's a fast deadline, you gotta turn it around, and that may leave people
Right.
out. And then I will say about people who have grants or contracts where they're already underway, you've already been awarded it, you've done the work, the administration is trying to hold some of those back, but we are in court in more than 100 court cases around the country, and that's one of the issues we're in court about, is it would be one thing to make a set of rules about contracts that we're gonna enter into tomorrow, but to change the rules about contracts or grants that have already been awarded, we're starting to win a lot of those cases, like, the USAID contracts that got interrupted. Wait a minute, that was an existing contract, you can't interrupt that. So we will make sure that there are court cases challenging any interruption of existing contracts. And I think we're gonna be successful in court cases there, but I think the issue of what do they do going forward, or monies that haven't yet been allocated, can they hold them back? We wanna explore that in addition to that.
Thank you for that response, Susan. I think one thing that would help us is, maybe helping us identify some of those suits that are moving in court.
Yep.
We have maybe 2 or 3, contracts with the NBFA that are pretty much frozen.
Okay.
And we would like to maybe work with some of those complaints that are already moving and see what we can do to get some traction.
Great, and we can have Evan work on those specific contracts. Evan would be glad to push from our office.
Senator, one more thing.
Yeah,
It's when legislation's passed and it's at the discretion of the secretary.
yeah.
That we've really seen things being drawn out.
Mhm.
And just like with the American Rescue Plan, Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color, there was a process that was created, it was ran in the public register, it was all these things, and those were things that drug out the process,
Right.
which allowed, I feel like it allowed, for the other farmers to intervene in court.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what we're looking at, is to say, yes, we do believe that sometimes government needs to be mainstream, and there should be things that are taken, and addressed, and, we're all for that, and we're here, and we wanna see when legislation's passed, that it's passed, and that those monies get to those farmers, because time is of the essence.
Right, when I was here before, it was probably right about the time the American Rescue Plan passed, it was probably in April of 2021. So we had this good piece of legislation that passed, but the actual delivery of the dollars, attorney generals and others sued, and then that delayed, and now here we are in a next administration with money unspent. What's gonna happen to it? I hear you.
Right,
I hear you.
and one of those things is that mask program, because
Yeah.
a great deal of money was put into it, where I think the final budget was 2.65 million,
Okay,
and the farmers could receive payments up to 900,000.
yeah,
And so when we looked at the payment and the way that it was even allocated and distributed,
mhm,
more money went to the high-end producers and very little to the small producers.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're asking for, is sometimes, for consideration, because a lot of things, within the agriculture sector are done based upon base acres.
yeah.
And base acres and the history and the way it's inherited is very unfair to small-scale producers and new producers.
Yeah, I do support the Lumbee as well, because the Lumbee helped us with our tribes, and I was on the phone with my tribes last week, and they were like, we support the Lumbee. They did have one ask, which was fair. They said, if we add enrolled tribal members, you gotta add resources too. You don't add new members and keep the resources the same, and then it gets thinner and thinner to each tribe, and that's a fair request, obviously, but they're strongly supporting Lumbee recognition. So, please, how about the Richmond question?
Okay.
Lauren?
My question is, I can follow everything that you were saying about the rule of law
Yep.
and how you get it. But he doesn't seem, President Trump, to be concerned about the rule of law.
Yep.
He skates by it over it and does whatever he wants to. So my question is, how do you stop someone like that to make sure that they do follow the rule of law.
Yeah.
And that they just don't, he just gonna keep implementing things that suit him and only him and whoever he likes.
Yeah.
Because I understand about, gonna take it to the judge and to the courts and this and that and other. But listen to everybody talk. It seems to be drawn out to suit his benefit.
Yeah.
So how will the Democratic Party rail him in to make him realize that he does, in this particular country, have to follow the rule of law or he's going to suffer consequences?
Yeah.
And so far, he has not followed them when they suit him.
Right.
And he has not suffered any consequences, any negative ones.
Lauren, that's a really important question, and it's not separate from the farm issue, because again, like, if there are laws about these farm programs and the dollars are supposed to be used for this purpose and Congress put them in a budget, we argue he can't say, no, I'm not spending that money. That violates something called the Impoundment Act, which was put in law after President Nixon tried to do the same thing. And what the Impoundment Act basically says is, when Congress has passed a budget signed by the president, then the president must implement that budget and doesn't have the discretion to say, well, I'm going to implement these 5 programs and I'm not going to implement these 10. So the rule of law is a really important question that ties directly to these farming issues. So what's my answer to that? That is that's one of the 2 or 3 biggest questions right now, is whether this White House will follow or disobey court orders. We're early in the administration, so what happens is court cases get filed and there are preliminary rulings, but that aren't completely final. A preliminary injunction where the administration says, well, we're going to appeal, or we're going to go to a final trial and the trial court may rule otherwise. We've already seen at least one judge do a preliminary injunction for us, but then in the final trial decide no, that the case needed to be dismissed for some reason. So early on, what the administration is doing is saying, okay, we got a ruling against us, but that's preliminary, so we're going to continue to appeal. But at some point, there's going to be a ruling that's final, that there's no more appeal from it.
But is he going to follow it?
That is the question. That is the question.
And what's going to be in place if he doesn't follow it? Because if he runs the country
Yeah.
like he ran his companies,
Yep.
didn't pay his subs,
Mm-hmm.
and ran everybody out of business, and
Yep.
he has yet and held his feet to the fire.
Right.
In particular, how is the Democratic Party going to stop that abuse?
Well, look, I mean, I think the question is, how's the American public going to stop abuse? Because at the end of the day, the only guarantee is not words written in a constitution. It's whether the public believes we want to have a rule of law. I believe this. Here's what I believe. When we get into a court order situation where the administration is clearly flouting a court order, right now where a judge ordered them to stop these deportations over the weekend, deporting Venezuelans to El Salvador, of all places. And the judge ordered them to stop because the administration was saying all these deportees are part of this Venezuelan gang. But their family members were coming forward and saying, no, this person is Venezuelan, but they're not part of the gang. And the judge said, you got to stop until you determine whether these folks are gang connected or not. And they went ahead and deported anyway. The day of reckoning may be coming very, very soon. I do believe the courts are not going to cave for Trump. And I'll tell you why. Because the courts, let me just finish this piece and then I'll get to what if I'm right, the courts don't cave. The actions that Trump is taking, the courts can't easily say that's okay without hurting themselves as well. Because if the courts were to say, for example, yeah, if the president can switch money around from this account to that account, well, the courts know he could take our money. The Doge brothers and Elon Musk went into the General Services Administration, which covers all real estate, federal real estate. And they sent out a letter to every federal agency in rental space saying, we consider your lease terminable at will. Well, a lot of those letters went to courts that lease space and U.S. attorneys that lease space, and they said, hold on a second, now you're coming after us. So I do think the courts are going to show a backbone. Even the Supreme Court is going to show a backbone because they can't approve what Trump is doing without undercutting their own funding and legitimacy. But your question is, okay, even if that's true, say the courts stand up against Trump and they stop him, but he He
doesn't
doesn't
hear
listen
to
to
it.
them.
Mhm.
You're gonna have a full-blown constitutional crisis. Andrew Jackson tried to do that in the 1830s. He got a ruling against his forced removal of tribal people from the Supreme Court, removal from tribal people from North Carolina and Florida. And he said after the ruling, well, does the Supreme Court have an army to stop me? And he tried to stop him, but the American public rose up against him and stopped him from doing that. And that's what we're gonna need.
Yes.
I mean, we're gonna need the American public, and when the American public does that, how does that work? Well, what happens is, it evinces we need right now, bluntly, is we need Republicans, we've got 47 Dems in the Senate. We need 4 Republicans on critical votes. We got 3 Republicans to vote with us against Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. They broke early on it. We got Republicans to tell President Trump when he nominated Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General, you better pull that nomination back, it ain't gonna happen. I think we may get Republicans on this Canadian tariff vote. Will we get 4? I don't know that we'll get 4. But eventually, in the first Trump term, it got to August, it was 8 months of this kind of stuff. Muslim travel ban and all kinds of foolishness. We couldn't get Republicans to go with this. It got to August and they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act and cut Medicaid. We had Republicans that joined with us and stopped that. And I think there will come a time, either because of the economy being chaotic or cuts to Medicaid, which they're probably going to try to do, give tax cut, where we will be able to have Republicans join us. And if the president tries to violate a court order and says, I'm not following it, I do think we will have Republicans in the Senate who will join with us. That's my prediction.
My last thing,
Yeah.
do you think he is going to get rid of all of what he claims for the auto tax that Biden signed for his executive order?
He's gonna try, I think that case is gonna fail. He's gonna try, that's his argument against, the Biden pardons don't matter, or other things don't matter, and I think that argument's going nowhere.
Thank you.
You bet. Yeah, please, sir.
Stance on farmland preservation.
At the state level, I was very involved in that, obviously through things like the conservation tax credit, which enabled farmers to put easements and then, have a value for that easement that they could use to keep farmland in, as a working farm rather than be a subdivision or something like that. So, and then we have some programs at the federal level that support that as well. But I'm very open to, are there ways to do more? And I know that there have been some local government, controversies in Virginia around things like solar farms and data centers and what is happening, and does that get in the way of farmland preservation? That's more for the General Assembly than for Congress. But if there are things we can do, and that might be one, actually, to your question of what are opportunities.
I'd like to see the state of Virginia step up in that department.
Yep.
For example, Pennsylvania
Mhm.
and Maryland, they're role models. I'd like to see state of Virginia do a study on that
Okay.
and get that rolling, because that's a great economic tool to help
Yep.
small farmers.
Mhm.
I wrote a letter to the USDA a few years back stating that black farmers have lost so much land, and why not preserve the existing land we have today? And I got, answer would be too discriminatory, but I don't think so. It's a part of history.
Yep.
And I think all farmland, black farmland especially, should be preserved.
And you think Pennsylvania and Maryland?
Pennsylvania, Maryland,
Yeah, tell me about that.
Maryland, the highest I've heard per acre is $50,000 per acre, that's near down the ocean.
Mhm.
Pennsylvania average is $10,000 per acre. So if you got 100 acres of land, you get $1 million to preserve
Yep.
your land. You get 75% of their cost
Right.
to preserve your land.
Okay.
I was UPS driver in the area, so I know a dairy farmer 2 years ago, he just got $800,000 to preserve his farmland. So that's something that's needed here in the state of Virginia, because we tell people from the state of Virginia, oh, how beautiful it is.
If you don't mind,